The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the dusty saloon, and Victoria Lancaster knew her life had just changed forever, though whether for better or worse remained terrifyingly unclear. She stepped down onto the packed earth of Desdemona, Texas, her worn boots sending up small clouds of dust that clung to the hem of her already filthy dress. The July heat of 1882 pressed down on her like a physical weight, and she could feel sweat trickling down her spine beneath the corset that felt 2 sizes too small after 3 days of travel. The town was smaller than she had imagined, just a single dusty street lined with weather-beaten buildings that seemed to sag under the relentless sun. A general store, a bank, the saloon, and a handful of other structures she could not quite make out through the shimmering heat waves. In the distance, she could see the oil derricks that had sprung up around Desdemona in recent years, black silhouettes against the pale sky that promised wealth to some and hardship to most. Victoria clutched her single carpetbag tighter and tried to ignore the stares of the men loitering outside the saloon. She knew what they saw when they looked at her. A woman alone, traveling without a male escort, wearing a dress that had seen better days and carrying everything she owned in one small bag. They saw desperation, and in a town like this, desperation meant opportunity for those willing to take advantage. She had come to Desdemona to marry Samuel Pritchard, a man she had never met, but who had answered her advertisement in the matrimonial news. His letters had been brief and to the point, promising nothing except honest work and a roof over her head. After the factory fire in Philadelphia that had killed her mother and left Victoria with nothing but debts she could never hope to repay, honest work and a roof sounded like paradise. But Samuel Pritchard was not waiting at the stage stop. Victoria waited in the shade of the saloon's overhang for nearly an hour, watching the street and trying not to think about what she would do if he never came. The other passengers had long since dispersed, and the driver had given her a pitying look before climbing back onto his seat and driving away. She was alone in a strange town with exactly $3.42 to her name, and the man who was supposed to become her husband was nowhere to be seen. "You waiting for someone, miss?" The voice came from behind her, and Victoria spun around, her heart hammering. The man standing in the doorway of the saloon was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore dusty work clothes and a hat pushed back on his head, revealing eyes that were an unexpected shade of warm brown. He looked to be in his mid-20s, perhaps a year or 2 older than Victoria's own 22 years, and there was something in his expression that was not the predatory interest she had seen in the other men's faces. It looked almost like genuine concern. "I am waiting for Samuel Pritchard," Victoria said, lifting her chin and trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Do you know him?" Something shifted in the man's expression, and Victoria felt her stomach drop even before he spoke. "I am afraid I have some bad news, miss. Samuel Pritchard died 4 days ago. Accident out at the oil fields. A cable snapped and struck him in the head. He died instantly, or so they say." The world seemed to tilt sideways, and Victoria had to put a hand against the wall to steady herself. Dead. The man she had traveled 1,500 miles to marry was dead, and she was standing in a town where she knew no one, with $3 to her name and nowhere to go. "I am sorry to be the one to tell you," the man continued, and he did sound genuinely sorry. "Were you kin to him?" "No." Victoria's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "No, I was supposed to marry him. He sent for me. I arrived today." The man's expression shifted to something that looked like pity mixed with anger, though Victoria could not imagine what he had to be angry about. "That is a rough deal," he said quietly. "Did you come far, Philadelphia?" He let out a low whistle. "That is a hell of a journey to make for nothing. You have people back there. Someone you can wire for money to get home." Victoria shook her head. There was no one. Her father had died when she was 12, her mother in the factory fire 6 months ago. She had no siblings, no other family that she knew of. That was why she had placed the advertisement in the first place, why she had been willing to marry a stranger and move halfway across the country to a place she had never seen. "I see," the man said, and from the look in his eyes, Victoria suspected he really did see, more than she wished he did. "Well, you cannot just stand here in the heat. Have you eaten today?" "I am fine," Victoria said automatically, though in truth she had not eaten since the previous evening. The last of her food had run out somewhere in East Texas, and she had been saving her remaining money for after she arrived in Desdemona. "You look like you are about to fall over," the man said bluntly. "Come on. At least let me buy you a meal while you figure out what you are going to do." Victoria knew she should refuse. She did not know this man, and accepting favors from strangers was dangerous, especially for a woman alone. But the heat and hunger and shock of the news were all catching up with her at once, and she found herself nodding before she could think better of it. The man picked up her carpet bag before she could protest. "Name is Tobias Whitmore," he said, gesturing for her to follow him down the street. "Most folks just call me Tobias. I work one of the ranches outside town. The Double R been in town today picking up supplies." "Victoria Lancaster," she replied, hurrying to keep pace with his long strides. "People call me Victoria." He glanced at her with a slight smile. "Not Vicky." "Never Vicky," she said firmly, and was surprised when the smile widened into something that looked almost like a genuine grin. "Victoria it is, then." He led her to a small restaurant she had not noticed before, tucked between the general store and what looked like a boarding house. The inside was blessedly cool and dim after the glare of the street, and the smell of cooking food made Victoria's stomach clench with hunger. Tobias guided her to a table in the corner and flagged down the woman who seemed to be running the place. "2 plates of whatever you have hot, Rosie, and some cold water." "Coming right up, Tobias," the woman said, giving Victoria a curious but not unkind look before disappearing back into the kitchen. Victoria folded her hands in her lap and tried to think of something to say. She was acutely aware of how she must look, dusty and travel-worn and probably half wild with exhaustion. "Thank you," she finally managed. "You did not have to do this." Tobias shrugged, pulling off his hat and setting it on the chair beside him. "Could not just leave you standing there looking like a lost calf. Besides, it is just a meal. Not asking anything in return if that is what you are worried about." Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I did not mean to suggest. I know what you meant," Tobias said, his tone gentler. "And you are right to be cautious. But I promise you, I am not looking to take advantage. My mama raised me better than that, and I like to think some of it stuck." The water arrived, blessedly cool, and Victoria drank deeply while trying not to look too desperate. Tobias pretended to be occupied with straightening his silverware, giving her a moment to compose herself. "So what will you do?" he asked after a moment. "Philadelphia is a long way to go back to with no money." "I will find work," Victoria said, trying to sound more certain than she felt. "I can sew, and I can cook and clean. Surely someone in town needs help." Tobias's expression was doubtful. "Desdemona is not much of a place for work, especially for a woman alone. The oil boom brought a lot of men looking for fortune, but it did not bring much in the way of respectable jobs for ladies. The saloon is always looking for girls, but I do not think that is what you have in mind." It was not. Victoria knew exactly what kind of work the saloon offered to women, and she would rather starve than resort to that. She had promised herself when she left Philadelphia that she would make a decent life for herself, that she would not end up like some of the desperate women she had seen in the factory district, selling themselves just to survive. "There must be something," she said, hearing the edge of desperation creep into her voice despite her best efforts. "A family that needs help with children, or a store that needs a clerk, or the problem is not that the work does not exist," Tobias interrupted gently. "The problem is that no one is going to hire a woman they do not know, especially one with no references and no place to stay. Folks around here are suspicious of strangers. Too many people have come through claiming to be one thing and turning out to be another." Victoria felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry, not here in front of this stranger who had already seen too much of her desperation. She had survived the factory fire and her mother's death and the long, frightening journey west. She would survive this too. She had to. The food arrived, and for a few minutes Victoria focused on eating, trying to ignore the way her hands trembled slightly as she cut into the steak on her plate. It was better than anything she had eaten in months, tender and flavorful with potatoes and carrots on the side. She forced herself to eat slowly, to maintain some semblance of dignity, but it was hard when all she wanted to do was shovel the food into her mouth as fast as possible. Tobias ate in silence, occasionally glancing at her but not saying anything. Victoria was grateful for that. She needed time to think, to figure out what she was going to do next. When the plates were cleared away, Tobias leaned back in his chair and regarded her thoughtfully. "I might have an idea," he said slowly, "but you will probably think it is crazy." "I am listening," Victoria said. At this point she was willing to consider almost anything. "The Double R, the ranch where I work, has been looking for someone to help out at the main house. The boss, Mrs. Rebecca Winters, has been running the place since her husband died last year, and she has been doing it mostly on her own except for an old Mexican woman who comes in a few times a week to help with the heavy cleaning. Mrs. Winters has been saying for months that she needs someone full-time to help with the cooking and housekeeping and such, but she has not found anyone suitable." "You think she would hire me?" Victoria asked, trying not to let too much hope creep into her voice. "I think she might if I vouched for you," Tobias said. "She trusts my judgment, and Lord knows she needs the help. The place is falling apart around her ears, and she is too proud to admit it. But I have to warn you, it will not be easy work. The ranch is hard living, and Mrs. Winters can be prickly as a cactus when she wants to be. But she is fair, and she pays decent wages, and you would have a roof over your head and 3 meals a day." It sounded like heaven. A job, a place to stay, regular meals. Victoria would have scrubbed floors on her hands and knees for that, and if this Mrs. Winters was prickly, well, Victoria had dealt with worse. The factory foremen had been tyrants, and the landlady at her last boarding house had been a nightmare of pettiness and cruelty. She could handle prickly. "When can we go?" Victoria asked. Tobias blinked, clearly surprised by her immediate acceptance. "Just like that. You do not want to think about it." "What is there to think about?" Victoria said. "I have no other options, and you are offering me one. I would be a fool not to take it." Something that might have been respect flickered in Tobias's eyes. "All right, then. I was planning to head back to the ranch this afternoon anyway. We can go together, and I will introduce you to Mrs. Winters. But I cannot promise she will hire you. That decision is hers to make." "I understand," Victoria said, "and thank you. You have been very kind when you did not have to be." Tobias looked uncomfortable with the praise. "Like I said, it is just common decency, nothing special about it." "But it was special." Victoria thought as they left the restaurant and Tobias went to retrieve his wagon from behind the general store. In her experience, common decency was far less common than the name suggested. Most people looked out for themselves and their own, and strangers were problems to be avoided, not helped. The fact that Tobias had not only fed her, but was now offering to help her find work, was more kindness than she had experienced in a long time. The wagon was loaded with supplies, sacks of flour and sugar, coils of rope, tools, and various other items that Victoria assumed were needed for ranch work. Tobias helped her up onto the seat, his hands respectful and careful, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. The ride out of town took them past the oil derricks Victoria had seen earlier. Up close, they were even more imposing, tall wooden structures that creaked and groaned as they pumped crude oil from deep beneath the Texas earth. Men swarmed around them, covered in black sludge and sweat, shouting to be heard over the mechanical din. The smell was overwhelming, a thick, oily stench that made Victoria's eyes water. "That is what brought most folks to Desdemona," Tobias said, nodding toward the derricks. "Oil. They struck it about 3 years back, and suddenly everyone thought they were going to get rich. Some did. Most did not. Samuel Pritchard was one of the ones who did not." "You knew him?" Victoria asked. "Not well," Tobias admitted. "He kept to himself mostly. Worked hard, drank hard, not much else to say about him." "I am sorry you came all this way for nothing." Victoria nodded but did not trust herself to speak. The reality of her situation was still sinking in. She had been prepared to marry a stranger, to build a life with someone she did not know or love. Now that stranger was dead, and she was dependent on the charity of another stranger to even survive. It was terrifying and humiliating in equal measure. As they left the oil fields behind, the landscape opened up into rolling prairie dotted with scrub brush and the occasional stand of trees. The heat was still oppressive, but there was a breeze now that made it slightly more bearable. Victoria could see cattle in the distance, red and white shapes moving slowly across the grassland. "The Double R runs about 2,000 head, Tobias said, following her gaze. "We are not the biggest ranch in the area, but we do all right. Mrs. Winters's husband built it up from nothing, and she has kept it running since he passed. That is no small feat for a woman on her own." "What happened to her husband?" Victoria asked. "Thrown from a horse," Tobias said. "Broke his neck. He was dead before he hit the ground, or so they say." "It was a damn shame. Robert Winters was a good man, fair to his workers and generous with those who needed help. Mrs. Winters does her best to live up to his legacy, but it is hard. A lot of the other ranchers do not take her seriously because she is a woman, and some of the workers have tried to take advantage. She has had to fire more than one man for thinking he could get away with things he would not have tried if her husband was still alive." Victoria felt a pang of sympathy for this Mrs. Winters she had not yet met. She knew what it was like to be a woman in a world that did not take women seriously, that saw them as weak and in need of male protection and guidance. She had fought against those assumptions her whole life. First in school, where the teachers had told her not to bother with advanced mathematics because girls did not need such things. Then in the factory, where the foreman had paid her half what they paid the men for the same work. The ranch buildings came into view about an hour after they left town. The main house was a sprawling single-story structure built of wood and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. It was not fancy, but it looked solid and well-maintained. Behind it, Victoria could see a barn, several smaller outbuildings, and a bunkhouse where she assumed the ranch hands lived. Tobias pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main house and jumped down, then came around to help Victoria descend. She had just gotten both feet on the ground when the front door opened, and a woman emerged. Rebecca Winters was not what Victoria had expected. She had imagined someone older, perhaps a gray-haired widow in her 50s or 60s. But the woman standing on the porch looked to be barely 40, with dark blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun and sharp blue eyes that assessed Victoria with the kind of thoroughness usually reserved for livestock. She was dressed in a simple cotton dress with an apron tied around her waist, and there was a smudge of flour on one cheek. "Tobias," she said, her voice crisp and businesslike. "You are back earlier than I expected. Who is this?" "Mrs. Winters, this is Victoria Lancaster," Tobias said. "She just arrived in town today, came all the way from Philadelphia to marry Samuel Pritchard." Mrs. Winters's expression softened slightly. "Oh, I heard about Sam. That is a terrible thing. I am very sorry for your loss, Miss Lancaster." "Thank you," Victoria said quietly. "Though I cannot truly claim it as a loss, since I never actually met him, but it has left me in a difficult position." "I would imagine so," Mrs. Winters said dryly. "And I suppose Tobias brought you here because he thought I might help." "I know you have been looking for someone to help around the house," Tobias said. "Miss Lancaster needs work, and she has experience with cooking and housekeeping. Seemed like it might be a good fit for both of you." Mrs. Winters was silent for a long moment, her sharp eyes still fixed on Victoria. Victoria forced herself to stand up straight and meet that gaze steadily. She knew she was being judged, and she knew her future depended on what this woman decided in the next few minutes. "You ever worked on a ranch before?" Mrs. Winters asked finally. "No, madam," Victoria admitted. "But I am a hard worker and I learn quickly. I worked in a textile factory in Philadelphia for 3 years, and before that I helped my mother run a boarding house. I can cook, clean, sew, and handle household accounts. I do not shirk hard work and I do not complain. Can you shoot?" The question caught Victoria off guard. "A gun?" "No, madam." "You will need to learn," Mrs. Winters said matter-of-factly. "This is not the city. We have rattlesnakes, coyotes, and occasionally worse. I will not have someone working in my house who cannot defend themselves if needed." "I am willing to learn," Victoria said. Mrs. Winters studied her for another long moment, then sighed. "All right. I will give you a trial period of 1 month. You will help with cooking, cleaning, laundry, and whatever else needs doing around the house. In exchange, you get a room, 3 meals a day, and $2 a week. If you work out, we can discuss making it permanent. If you do not, you will be on your way with whatever wages you have earned." Fair enough. $2 a week was not much, but it was more than Victoria had now, and the room and meals were worth their weight in gold. "More than fair," Victoria said. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters. I promise you will not regret this." "We will see, Mrs. Winters said, but there was a hint of warmth in her voice now. "Come on inside. I will show you where you will be staying and get you settled. Tobias, you can bring her bag in and then get those supplies unloaded." "Yes, madam," Tobias said with a slight smile. Victoria followed Mrs. Winters into the house, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and nervousness. She had a job. She had a place to stay. She was not going to end up destitute and alone in a strange town. It was more than she had dared hope for just an hour ago. The inside of the house was neat but showed signs of neglect. The floors needed a good scrubbing, and there was dust on most of the surfaces. The furniture was solid but worn, and the curtains were faded from sun exposure. It was clear that Mrs. Winters had been trying to maintain the place on her own and losing the battle. "This will be your room," Mrs. Winters said, opening a door off the main hallway. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the prairie. "It is not much, but it is private and the roof does not leak. Outhouse is out back, and there is a pump in the kitchen for water. We heat water for baths on Saturday nights or whenever else you need it if you do not mind heating it yourself." "It is perfect," Victoria said honestly. The room was small, but it was hers, and that was more than she had dared dream of. "Good," Mrs. Winters said. "Get yourself settled, then come find me in the kitchen. We have a lot to do before supper, and I could use an extra pair of hands." Victoria unpacked her meager belongings quickly. She had 2 other dresses, both as worn as the one she was wearing, some undergarments, a nightgown, a hairbrush, and a small Bible that had belonged to her mother. It all fit easily into the dresser with room to spare. She changed into her other dress, which was slightly less filthy than the one she had been wearing, and used the water in the pitcher on the dresser to wash her face and hands. Then she made her way back to the kitchen. Mrs. Winters was peeling potatoes, and she nodded toward another knife and a pile of vegetables on the table. "You can start with those carrots and onions. We are feeding 6 tonight, 7 including you. Tobias and 3 other hands eat up at the house most nights. The rest eat down at the bunkhouse." Victoria picked up the knife and got to work. The rhythm of the task was soothing, familiar. She had spent countless hours helping her mother prepare meals at the boarding house, and her hands moved automatically through the motions. They worked in companionable silence for a while before Mrs. Winters spoke again. "Tobias is a good man," she said, not looking up from her work. "One of the best hands I have ever had. His father worked for my husband for years before he passed, and Tobias has been here since he was 16. He is honest, hard-working, and he does not cause trouble. If he vouched for you, that counts for something in my book." "He has been very kind," Victoria said. "I do not know what I would have done if he had not helped me." "Probably would have ended up at the saloon," Mrs. Winters said bluntly. "That is where most desperate women end up in this town. It is a hard life out here, especially for a woman alone. Men outnumber women 10 to 1, and most of them see a woman without protection as fair game. You need to be careful." "I will be," Victoria promised. "Good. And another thing, since we are being plain with each other. I run a respectable household here. I do not tolerate drinking, gambling, or fooling around with the hands. You keep your interactions with the men professional and respectful, and make sure they do the same with you. Any man who gives you trouble, you come tell me immediately. I will not have that kind of nonsense on my ranch." "Yes, madam." Mrs. Winters finally looked up, and her expression was slightly softer. "I know I sound harsh, but I have learned the hard way that you have to set clear boundaries from the start. After Robert died, I had men trying all sorts of things, thinking I would be so desperate for help or companionship that I would be easy to manipulate. I have had to fire 3 hands for overstepping, and I have had to threaten lawsuits against 2 other ranchers who tried to cheat me on cattle sales. I will not be taken advantage of, and I will not have the women in my household taken advantage of either." Victoria felt a surge of respect for this woman who had clearly fought hard to maintain her independence and her ranch. "I understand, Mrs. Winters, and I appreciate you being direct with me. Call me Rebecca when it is just us," Mrs. Winters said. "Mrs. Winters is for when the hands are around. Now, let us get this stew cooking before the men start banging on the door demanding to know where their supper is." They worked together to prepare the meal, and Victoria found herself relaxing into the routine. Rebecca was exacting but not cruel, pointing out when Victoria did something wrong, but also praising when she did something well. It was so different from the factory, where the foreman had only ever criticized and never acknowledged good work. Tobias came in as they were setting the table, his hair damp from washing up at the pump outside. He was followed by 3 other men, all dusty and tired looking from a day's work. They removed their hats respectfully as they entered, nodding to Rebecca and eyeing Victoria with open curiosity. "Men, this is Victoria Lancaster," Rebecca said. "She will be helping me around the house starting today. Victoria, this is Marcus, Jerome, and Hank." The men mumbled their greetings and Victoria nodded back politely. They were all older than Tobias, ranging from perhaps 30 to 50, weathered and sun-browned from years of outdoor work. They did not seem threatening, just curious, and Victoria relaxed slightly. The meal was simple but filling, and the conversation around the table was mostly about ranch business. How many cattle needed to be moved to the south pasture, which fences needed mending, whether they should hire on extra help for the upcoming roundup. Victoria listened quietly, learning about the rhythms and concerns of ranch life. She caught Tobias watching her once or twice, and each time he gave her a small smile that was somehow reassuring. He had kept his promise and helped her find work, and she found herself grateful beyond words for his intervention. After supper, the men headed back to the bunkhouse, and Tobias lingered for a moment on the porch. Victoria was helping Rebecca clear the dishes when Rebecca shooed her outside with a knowing look. "Go on. Tell the man thank you properly. He earned it today." Victoria stepped out onto the porch, wrapping her arms around herself against the cooling evening air. Tobias was leaning against the porch rail, looking out over the darkening prairie. "I wanted to thank you again," Victoria said, "for everything you did today. I do not know how I can ever repay you." Tobias turned to face her, and in the lamplight spilling from the windows, his expression was gentle. "You do not owe me anything, Victoria. I just did what anyone should have done." "But not everyone would have," Victoria said. "Most people would have walked right past me and never looked back." "Then most people are fools," Tobias said simply. "You were in trouble, and I was in a position to help. That is all there is to it." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and Victoria found herself studying him more closely. There was something solid and dependable about Tobias Whitmore, something that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt in a very long time. It was a strange feeling, and she was not entirely sure what to do with it. "I should get back inside," she said finally. "Rebecca will think I am shirking my duties on my first day." "That would not be a good start," Tobias agreed with a slight smile. "Good night, Victoria. I will see you tomorrow." "Good night, Tobias." Victoria went back inside, her mind full of confused thoughts and feelings. She had come to Texas expecting to marry a stranger and live a hard life. The hard life part was still true, but now there was also this unexpected kindness from Tobias and the possibility of something resembling a fresh start. It was overwhelming and hopeful and terrifying all at once. She helped Rebecca finish the dishes and clean up the kitchen, then stumbled exhausted to her small room. She changed into her nightgown, said her prayers more fervently than she had in months, and fell into bed. Despite her exhaustion, it took her a long time to fall asleep. Her mind kept returning to the events of the day, and to the image of Tobias's kind brown eyes and gentle smile. She had expected a rough life in Texas. She had been prepared for hardship and loneliness and struggle. But she had not been prepared for kindness, had not expected to find someone willing to help her without asking for anything in return. It was the kind of surprise that changed everything. And as Victoria finally drifted off to sleep, she wondered what other surprises Texas might have in store for her. The days fell into a rhythm over the next few weeks. Victoria rose before dawn to help Rebecca prepare breakfast for the hands, spent the morning cleaning and doing laundry, helped with the midday meal, spent the afternoon on whatever tasks needed doing, from mending clothes to preserving vegetables. and then prepared supper before collapsing into bed exhausted every night. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done in the factory, but it was also strangely satisfying. She could see the results of her labor in the clean floors and fresh-smelling linens, in the well-cooked meals and mended clothes. And Rebecca, for all her initial severity, proved to be a fair and even generous employer. She praised Victoria's work when it was well done and corrected her mistakes without being cruel about it. But what surprised Victoria most was how much she found herself looking forward to the times when Tobias came to the house. He was there for meals, of course, along with the other hands, but he also found excuses to come by at other times. He brought vegetables from the garden he tended behind the bunkhouse. He offered to help move heavy furniture when Victoria was cleaning. He stopped by to ask Rebecca questions about ranch work that Victoria suspected he already knew the answers to, and he talked to her. Not in the rough, forward way that some of the other hands tried when Rebecca was not around, but in a genuinely interested way that made Victoria feel like he actually cared about what she had to say. He asked about her life in Philadelphia, about her mother and the boarding house and the factory. He listened when she talked about missing the city sometimes, about finding the vast emptiness of the prairie both beautiful and lonely. In return, he told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father who had died when Tobias was 19, about learning to work cattle and rope and break horses. He talked about the land with a passion that Victoria had never heard anyone use about anything, describing the way the prairie changed with the seasons, the different wildflowers that bloomed, the wildlife that lived in the scrub and grassland. "You really love it here," Victoria said one evening when they were sitting on the porch after supper. Rebecca had shooed them both outside, claiming she needed peace and quiet to work on the ranch accounts. "I do," Tobias admitted. "I know it seems harsh to someone from the city, but there is a freedom here that you cannot find anywhere else. You are not hemmed in by buildings and people and rules. You can ride for miles and not see another soul, just you and the horse and the sky." "That sounds lonely," Victoria said. "Sometimes it is," Tobias agreed, "but it is also peaceful, and there is something to be said for working with your hands, for building something real. When I help a calf be born, or fix a broken fence, or break a green horse, I know I have done something that matters. It is not much in the grand scheme of things, but it is honest work." Victoria thought about her days in the factory, doing the same repetitive task over and over again for 12 hours at a stretch, never seeing the finished product, never knowing if what she did mattered at all. "I think I understand," she said. "There is satisfaction in work you can see and touch, in knowing you made a difference, even a small one." "Exactly," Tobias said, and his smile was warm and genuine in the lamplight. They talked long into the evening, until Rebecca finally came out and told them both to get some sleep, before they were useless the next day. Victoria went to bed that night with a strange, fluttery feeling in her chest that she tried very hard not to examine too closely. The month trial period Rebecca had set past, almost without Victoria noticing. She was too busy learning how to shoot the rifle Rebecca insisted she needed to know how to use, learning the names of all the different plants that grew wild on the prairie, and which ones could be used for cooking or medicine, learning the rhythms and routines of ranch life. She was also too busy trying not to think about how much she looked forward to seeing Tobias every day, how her heart seemed to beat faster when he smiled at her, how she caught herself watching for him out the kitchen window while she worked. It was foolish, she told herself. She barely knew him. She had come to Texas to marry a practical stranger for practical reasons, not to fall in love. Love was a luxury she could not afford, a distraction that could only lead to heartache and disappointment. but her heart did not seem to be listening to her practical arguments. One evening toward the end of her second month at the ranch, Tobias asked if she would like to go riding with him the next afternoon. "There is a spot about an hour from here that I think you would like," he said. "If Rebecca can spare you for a few hours, that is." Victoria should have said no. She had work to do, and spending time alone with Tobias was only going to make her confusing feelings worse. But instead, she heard herself saying yes, that she would love to go riding with him. Rebecca gave her a knowing look when Victoria asked for the afternoon off, but she agreed without argument. "Just be back before supper time," she said. "And Victoria, be careful." Victoria was not entirely sure if Rebecca was warning her about the physical dangers of riding or about something else entirely, but she nodded and promised to be careful. Tobias had a gentle mare saddled and waiting for her when she came out after the midday meal, dressed in her oldest dress and with her hair braided back practical lie. He helped her mount, his hands careful and respectful, then swung up onto his own horse and led the way out across the prairie. The afternoon was beautiful, warm but not oppressively hot, with a breeze that kept the worst of the heat at bay. Victoria had been on horses a few times since arriving at the ranch, but never for more than a few minutes. Now, as they rode across the open grassland, she began to understand some of what Tobias had been talking about when he described the freedom of the prairie. They rode in comfortable silence for most of the journey, and Victoria found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait. She watched the landscape roll by, the endless grass dotted with wildflowers, the occasional stand of trees marking where a creek ran through a gully. Hawks circled overhead, and she saw rabbits bounding away through the grass as they passed. The spot Tobias had mentioned turned out to be a small oasis, a place where a spring bubbled up from the rocks to form a clear pool before flowing away in a narrow creek. Trees grew thick around the water, providing shade and shelter, and the air was noticeably cooler. "This is beautiful," Victoria said as Tobias helped her down from the horse. "I thought you might like it," Tobias said, looking pleased. "I come here sometimes when I need to think. It is one of the few places on the ranch where you can get out of the sun and hear something other than wind." They sat by the pool, and Tobias pulled a canteen and some biscuits wrapped in cloth from his saddlebag. They ate and drank while watching the water flow over the rocks, and Victoria felt more at peace than she had in months. "Can I ask you something?" Tobias said after a while. "Of course." "Do you regret coming to Texas? I mean, I know things did not work out the way you planned, but if you could go back and make the choice again, would you still come?" Victoria thought about it carefully before answering. "I think I would," she said finally. Life in Philadelphia was hard, and it was only going to get harder. At least here I have a chance to build something better, even if it is not what I originally expected. "I am glad you came," Tobias said quietly. "I know that is a selfish thing to say, given how much you have had to go through, but I am glad anyway." Victoria's heart was pounding. "Why?" Tobias turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Because I have never met anyone quite like you, Victoria Lancaster. You are brave and strong and kind, and you do not complain even when you have every right to. You work hard and you face what life throws at you with your head held high. I admire that. I admire you." "Tobias," Victoria whispered, not sure what to say. "I know it is too soon," Tobias continued. "I know you just got here and you have been through a lot and you probably do not want to hear this, but I could not keep it to myself anymore. I care about you, Victoria. More than I should, probably, given that we have only known each other a couple of months. But I do. And I wanted you to know that, even if you do not feel the same way." Victoria's mind was racing. She should tell him that she could not afford to have feelings for anyone, that she needed to focus on working and saving money and building a stable life. She should keep things professional and distant, but what came out of her mouth was the truth. "I care about you too." Tobias's face lit up with a smile that was like the sun breaking through clouds. "You do." "I do," Victoria admitted. "I have been trying not to because it seemed foolish and impractical and dangerous, but I cannot help it. You have been so kind to me, so patient and generous, and somewhere along the way I stopped being able to imagine my life without you in it." "Victoria," Tobias said, and then he was reaching for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle as they intertwined with hers. "I promise you, if you will give me a chance, I will do everything in my power to make you happy. I know I do not have much to offer. I am just a ranch hand with some savings and a lot of dreams. But I work hard and I am honest, and I will never do anything to hurt you or let you down." "You have already given me more than you know," Victoria said, her eyes burning with tears that she did not bother to hold back. "You gave me hope when I thought I had none left. You gave me kindness when I expected harshness. You saw me as a person worth helping when you could have just walked past. That is not nothing, Tobias. That is everything." They sat there by the spring, holding hands and watching the water flow, and Victoria felt something settle into place inside her. She had come to Texas expecting a rough life, expecting hardship and struggle and loneliness. And while those things were still present, they were balanced now by something she had never expected to find. She had found someone who saw her, really saw her, and valued what he saw. She had found someone who made her laugh and challenged her to grow and made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she deserved something good in her life. She had found love, sudden and unexpected and more precious than gold. They stayed by the spring until the sun began to sink lower in the sky, talking about everything and nothing. Tobias told her about his dreams of maybe someday owning a small piece of land himself, of building a house and running some cattle. Victoria told him about her dream of having a real home again, a place that was hers and stable and safe. "Maybe we could build those dreams together," Tobias said quietly. "Maybe we could," Victoria agreed. The ride back to the ranch was different from the ride out. They rode side by side now, their horses close enough that their legs occasionally brushed, and they talked easily like old friends or something more. Victoria felt lighter than she had in years, as if some weight she had been carrying for so long had finally been lifted. Rebecca took one look at them when they returned and smiled knowingly, but she did not say anything except to remind them that supper needed to be on the table in an hour. Victoria hurried to help, and if she found herself humming while she worked, well, no one commented on it. That night, after the dishes were cleared and the hands had gone back to the bunkhouse, Rebecca asked Victoria to sit with her for a moment. "I suppose Tobias finally worked up the courage to tell you how he feels," Rebecca said without preamble. Victoria felt her cheeks heat. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to anyone with eyes," Rebecca said with a slight smile. "He has been mooning over you since the day he brought you here. I was starting to think he was never going to say anything." "You do not mind?" Victoria asked hesitantly. "Mind? Why would I mind?" "Tobias is a good man, one of the best I have ever known. If you two want a court, you have my blessing. Just do not let it interfere with the work that needs doing, and do not do anything foolish." "We would not," Victoria said quickly. "I know you would not," Rebecca said. "You are both too practical for that. But I am saying it anyway, because it is my job to look out for you while you are working for me. Tobias has honorable intentions, I am sure, but if he ever does anything to make you uncomfortable, or if things do not work out the way you hope, you still have a place here. You do not have to stay with him just because you think you have nowhere else to go. Understood. Victoria felt a wave of gratitude and affection for this stern woman who had taken a chance on her. Understood, and thank you, Rebecca, for everything. You have earned your place here, Rebecca said. You work hard and you do not cause problems. That is all I ask. Now go on to bed. We have an early start tomorrow. The next few months were some of the happiest of Victoria's life. She and Tobias courted properly, with long talks on the porch in the evenings and rides out to the spring on Sunday afternoons, when work was lighter. He told her stories about growing up on the ranch, about close calls with angry bulls and wild horses. She told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about helping her mother with the boarding house and learning to navigate the crowded, noisy streets of the city. They talked about their hopes for the future, about the life they might build together. Tobias was saving his wages carefully, dreaming of the day he could buy a piece of land and start his own small ranch. Victoria found herself sharing that dream, imagining a small house and a garden, maybe some chickens and a milk cow. A simple life, but one that would be theirs. Rebecca watched their courtship with approval, occasionally offering advice or a knowing comment. The other hands had figured out what was happening and treated Victoria with extra respect, recognizing that she was spoken for by one of their own. The work continued, hard and constant, but no longer overwhelming. Victoria had learned the rhythms of ranch life, had grown strong from the physical labor. Her hands, which had been soft and pale from factory work, were now calloused and tanned. She could shoot the rifle well enough to hit a target more often than not, and she had learned to identify the plants and animals of the prairie. But more than that, she had learned to see the beauty in this harsh land. The sunsets that painted the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The way the grass rippled like water in the wind. The vast expanse of stars visible on clear nights, more stars than she had ever imagined existed. The wildflowers that bloomed in spring, carpeting the prairie in color. She had also learned to see the beauty in Tobias. Not just his handsome face, though she certainly appreciated that, but the gentleness in his strong hands, the patience in his voice when he was teaching her something new, the way his whole face lit up when he saw her. She had learned the way he always put others before himself, the way he worked harder than anyone else without complaining, the way he treated animals and people with equal kindness and respect. 6 months after they had met, Tobias asked her to marry him properly. They were at the spring again, their special place, and the sun was setting behind the trees when he got down on one knee and pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. "Victoria Lancaster, I know I am not much," he said. "Just a ranch hand with calloused hands and big dreams. But I love you with everything I have, and I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy. Will you marry me?" Victoria was crying, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Tobias, I will marry you." The ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit, and then Tobias was standing and pulling her into his arms. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Victoria felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony in Desdemona. The town had a small church now, and the circuit preacher happened to be passing through. Rebecca stood up as Victoria's witness, and Marcus stood up for Tobias. The other ranch hands attended, along with a handful of people from town who knew Tobias or worked for Rebecca. Victoria wore a new dress that Rebecca had helped her make, pale blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. It was the nicest thing she had ever owned. Tobias wore his best clothes, cleaned and pressed until they were as neat as he could make them. And the look in his eyes when he saw Victoria walk down the aisle made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. They said their vows in front of God and witnesses, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Tobias kissed her with such tenderness that Victoria felt tears slip down her cheeks. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. Rebecca had prepared a feast, and there was music and dancing in the church hall. Victoria danced with her new husband, her heart so full she thought it might overflow. She looked around at the people who had become her friends and family, at the life she had built in this hard land, and felt a gratitude so deep it was almost painful. She had come to Texas expecting nothing but hardship. She had found a home. Rebecca had given them 3 days away from the ranch for a honeymoon, a generosity that Victoria knew was not insignificant given how much work needed doing. They spent those 3 days at the spring, camping under the stars and learning to be husband and wife in every sense of the word. Tobias was gentle and patient with Victoria, who had never been with a man before. He took his time, making sure she was comfortable and happy, treating her like she was something precious and fragile. Victoria had heard horror stories from other women about their wedding nights, about pain and indignity in husbands who cared only for their own pleasure. But with Tobias, it was nothing like that. It was tender and sometimes awkward and ultimately beautiful, a physical expression of the love they already shared. They talked late into the nights, lying tangled together in their bedrolls and watching the stars wheel overhead. They made plans for their future, for the land they would save up to buy, for the house they would build, for the children they hoped to have someday. "I want to give them everything I never had," Victoria said. "Stability, safety, a home that cannot be taken away. I want them to grow up knowing they are loved and wanted." "They will have all that," Tobias promised. "We will make sure of it." When they returned to the ranch, Rebecca had moved Victoria's few belongings from her small room in the main house to a cabin about 100 yards away. It was tiny, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it had a stove and a bed and a table, and it was theirs. Rebecca had even stocked the shelves with basic supplies and left a pot of stew warming on the stove. "Consider it a wedding present," Rebecca said when they tried to thank her. "You are still working for me, of course, but newlyweds need privacy. You can come to the main house for meals when convenient, but I expect you will want to cook for yourselves sometimes too." Victoria hugged Rebecca impulsively, overcome with gratitude. "Thank you for everything. I do not know what I would have done without you." "You would have found a way," Rebecca said gruffly, but she returned the hug. "You are stronger than you think, Victoria Whitmore, Victoria Whitmore." It took her a moment to realize that was her name now. She was no longer Victoria Lancaster, the desperate factory girl with nowhere to go. She was Victoria Whitmore, wife of Tobias, member of a community, a woman with a home and a future. Life settled into a new rhythm. Victoria still helped Rebecca at the main house most days, but now she also had her own home to maintain. She planted a garden behind the cabin, coaxing vegetables from the hard soil. She learned to cook on the small stove, to make a little bit of food stretch a long way. She mended Tobias's clothes and kept the cabin clean, and tried to make it feel like a real home. Tobias worked long hours, from before dawn until after dusk most days, but he always came home to her with a smile on his face and love in his eyes. They ate supper together every night, talking about their days and making plans. On Sundays, they went to church in town and then spent the afternoon at the spring or riding across the prairie, stealing time together away from the constant demands of work. Victoria had never been happier. Oh, the work was still hard, and there were difficult days when everything seemed to go wrong. But she had Tobias, and she had a home, and she had a purpose. She was building something real, something lasting, and that made all the hardship worthwhile. 8 months after their wedding, Victoria realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but she wanted to be certain before she told Tobias. When she finally worked up the courage to share the news, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to be parents," he said, his eyes bright with tears. "Victoria, we are going to have a baby." "We are," Victoria confirmed, her own tears matching his. "I am scared, Tobias. I do not know the first thing about being a mother." "You will learn," Tobias said, setting her down gently and placing a protective hand over her still flat stomach. "We will learn together. And you are going to be an amazing mother, Victoria. I have no doubt about that." Rebecca was delighted when they told her the news. "About time," she said with a smile. "I was beginning to wonder if you two were ever going to get around to it. We will need to make some adjustments to your workload, Victoria. Nothing too strenuous, especially as you get further along." The pregnancy was not easy. Victoria suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, barely able to keep anything down. Rebecca made her special teas and broth, and Tobias worried over her like a mother hen. But gradually the sickness passed, and Victoria began to feel better. Her belly swelled with the growing child, and she felt the first flutters of movement that gradually became stronger kicks and jabs. Tobias was fascinated by the whole process, often placing his hands on her belly to feel the baby move. He talked to the baby constantly, telling stories and making promises about all the things they would do together. Victoria loved watching him with their unborn child, seeing the tenderness and wonder on his face. As the birth grew closer, Tobias became increasingly nervous. Rebecca arranged for the old Mexican woman who helped with the cleaning, a woman named Maria who had assisted at dozens of births, to be on hand when Victoria's time came. The cabin was stocked with clean linens and water, and everything they might need. Victoria went into labor on a cold morning in March of 1884, nearly 2 years after she had first arrived in Desdemona. The pain started slowly, just a dull ache in her back, but they built gradually over the course of the day until they were coming hard and fast. Maria and Rebecca attended her, while Tobias paced outside the cabin, too nervous to be much help. The labor was long and difficult. Victoria had heard that first babies often took their time, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer exhausting pain of it. She cried and screamed and gripped Rebecca's hand until she was sure she had broken bones. But finally, as the sun was setting, she felt the overwhelming urge to push, and then there was a burning sensation and finally, a release. The baby's cry filled the cabin, loud and healthy and indignant. "It is a boy," Maria announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A big, healthy boy." Victoria collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but elated. They had a son. She and Tobias had a son. Maria cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Victoria's arms. He was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair, and his eyes squeezed shut against the unfamiliar brightness. He was the most beautiful thing Victoria had ever seen. Tobias was allowed in then, and he approached the bed with something like awe on his face. "Victoria," he whispered, "you did it. He is perfect." "He is ours," Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. "Tobias, we have a son." They named him Robert, after Rebecca's late husband who had given Tobias's father a job all those years ago. Robert James Whitmore, a name to be proud of. The first few weeks with a newborn were exhausting. Robert needed to be fed every few hours, and he cried often, his tiny lungs powerful. Victoria was sore and tired and overwhelmed, but she was also happier than she had ever been. Tobias helped as much as he could, pacing the cabin at night with Robert when he would not settle, changing diapers, bringing Victoria food and water while she nursed. "You are such a good father," Victoria told him one night, watching as he swayed gently with Robert in his arms, humming a tuneless lullaby. "I am just doing what needs to be done," Tobias said, but he looked pleased. "No," Victoria insisted. "You are doing more than that. You are being the kind of father every child deserves, patient and gentle and involved. Our son is lucky to have you." "Our son is lucky to have us both," Tobias corrected. "Look at what we have built, Victoria. A home, a family, a life. When I think about where you were 2 years ago, standing alone and scared outside that saloon, and where we are now, it seems like a miracle." Victoria thought about that often in the months that followed. How much had changed, how far she had come. She had arrived in Texas expecting hardship and had found it, but she had also found so much more. She had found strength she did not know she possessed. She had found friends and community. She had found purpose and meaning, and most importantly, she had found love. Robert grew quickly, a healthy, happy baby who seemed to delight in everything around him. Victoria watched him learn to smile, to laugh, to grab at things with his chubby hands. Tobias made him toys from scraps of wood, carefully sanded smooth so there were no splinters. Rebecca doted on him like a grandmother, often stopping by the cabin to hold him and coo at him. When Robert was 6 months old, Tobias came home one evening with news that made Victoria's heart skip. "I talked to the land office in town today," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "There is a parcel about 5 miles from here, 160 acres, available under the Homestead Act. If we can prove we are improving it and living on it for 5 years, it will be ours free and clear." "Tobias, that is wonderful," Victoria said. "But what about the ranch?" "What about Rebecca?" "I talked to her too," Tobias said. "She says I can keep working for her part-time, especially during busy seasons like roundup and calving. But she understands that I want to build something for our family. She has even offered to help with advice and lend us some equipment to get started." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. Of course, Rebecca would be supportive. She had been nothing but kind and generous from the day Victoria arrived. "When can we see it?" "Tomorrow, if you want. We can ride out after breakfast. Take Robert with us." They went to see the land the next day, Robert bundled up and carried in a sling that Victoria had fashioned from a blanket. The parcel was beautiful, a mix of prairie and wooded areas with a creek running through one corner. There was a spot on a slight rise that would be perfect for a house, with views of the surrounding land and protection from the wind. "This is it," Tobias said, standing on that rise with his arm around Victoria's shoulders. "This is where we will build our home. Our real home, not just a cabin but a house that will stand for generations. This is where we will raise Robert and any other children we are blessed with. This is where we will grow old together." Victoria looked out over the land that would be theirs and felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged. Not in Philadelphia, not in some city where she was just another anonymous face in the crowd. But here, on this hard land under this big sky, building something real with her own hands and the hands of the man she loved. "Yes," she said, "this is home." They filed the claim the next week and began the long process of proving their homestead. Tobias built a small dugout to meet the residency requirements, a single room carved into the hillside with a front wall of logs and a roof of sod. It was crude but weatherproof, and they moved in despite Victoria's misgivings about raising a baby in such primitive conditions. "It is only temporary," Tobias reminded her. "Just until I can get a real house built, and think of the money we will save by not having to pay rent on the cabin." It was hard living, harder than anything Victoria had experienced before. The dugout was dark and damp, and things grew moldy if she did not watch them constantly. There were bugs and sometimes mice, despite her best efforts to keep them out. Water had to be hauled from the creek, and cooking over the open fire was difficult, but they managed. Tobias broke ground for a garden and planted crops, worked to build up a herd by buying a few head of cattle with their savings. Victoria kept house as best she could in the dugout, caring for Robert and helping with the outdoor work when she could. On the days when Tobias went to work for Rebecca, Victoria managed everything herself, carrying Robert on her back while she tended the garden and fed the animals. It was exhausting, and there were days when Victoria wanted to cry from frustration and weariness. But Tobias never complained, and his determination inspired her. He worked from sunrise to sunset and beyond, clearing land, building fences, caring for the livestock. Slowly, their homestead took shape. The first winter in the dugout was brutal. The wind howled across the prairie and found every crack in their crude shelter. They burned through their supply of firewood faster than Tobias could cut more, and there were nights when they all huddled together under every blanket they owned, with Robert between them for warmth. But they survived. When spring came, Tobias began building a real house. It was slow work, especially since he was doing it mostly alone in the hours he was not working for Rebecca or managing their own livestock. But board by board, nail by nail, the house took shape. It was not fancy. Just 4 rooms downstairs with a loft above. A simple frame structure with a stone chimney that Tobias built with help from Marcus and some of the other ranch hands. But it had real windows with glass panes, and wood floors instead of packed earth, and a proper stove in the kitchen. The day they moved out of the dugout and into the house, Victoria cried with relief. She had a real home again, a place with light and air and room to move. Tobias had built her a cupboard for her dishes, and a table with 4 chairs and a rocking chair where she could sit with Robert. "It is not much yet," Tobias said, watching her explore the empty rooms. "But we will make it nice, bit by bit. I will build you more furniture, and we can save up for curtains and rugs and all the things that make a house a home." "It is already a home," Victoria said, turning to wrap her arms around him. "Because you are here, you and Robert, that is all I need." But Tobias was determined to give her more. Over the next few years, he built a barn for their growing herd, a chicken coop, a smokehouse. He added a porch to the front of the house where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. He built Victoria a proper kitchen garden with raised beds and a fence to keep out the rabbits. The homestead prospered slowly but steadily. Their cattle multiplied, and they were able to sell some each year for a small profit. The garden produced well, and Victoria learned to preserve food for the winter. They were not rich, not by any stretch, but they were getting by, and the land was theirs. Robert grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's brown eyes and his mother's dark hair. He was curious and fearless, always getting into things he should not and keeping Victoria running to keep him safe. Tobias adored him, taking him everywhere when he was old enough to ride in front of the saddle, teaching him about the land and the animals. When Robert was 3, Victoria discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Tobias had the house well established now, with most of the heavy construction work done, so he could afford to take things a bit easier and be around more. Their second child, a daughter they named Emma Rose, was born in the summer of 1887 in the bedroom of their own house. The birth was faster and easier than Robert's had been, and Emma came into the world with a full head of blonde hair and her father's warm smile. Robert was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her constantly and help with everything. "Gentle," Victoria reminded him over and over, guiding his small hands to pat Emma's soft hair. "You have to be very gentle with babies." With 2 children, life became even busier, but Victoria found that she loved being a mother, loved watching her children grow and learn. She taught Robert his letters and numbers, read to them from the few books they owned, sang the songs her own mother had sung to her. Tobias was a devoted father, making time for the children no matter how busy he was. He carved wooden animals for them to play with, took Robert riding, showed him how to care for the livestock. When Emma was old enough, he did the same with her, never treating her as less capable just because she was a girl. The homestead continued to grow. 5 years after they had filed their claim, they received the deed that made the land officially theirs. It was a moment of celebration, a milestone that represented everything they had worked for. 160 acres, Tobias said, holding the paper like it was made of gold. "Free and clear in our names. This is ours, Victoria, our children's inheritance. No one can ever take it away from us." Victoria thought about her mother, who had worked herself to death and died owning nothing. She thought about the factory where she had labored for years with nothing to show for it. And she looked at the paper in Tobias's hands, proof of ownership of something real and lasting, and felt a sense of accomplishment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. "We did it," she said. "We really did it." "You did it," Tobias corrected. "You came to this place expecting nothing but hardship, and you survived and thrived and built this life with me. I am so proud of you, Victoria, so proud of everything you have accomplished." More years passed. Robert grew tall and strong, learning to work alongside his father. Emma became Victoria's shadow, learning to cook and sew and garden. 2 more children joined the family, another boy named Thomas and a girl named Sarah. The house had to be expanded to accommodate the growing family, and Tobias added 2 more rooms and a second floor. The barn was rebuilt larger and sturdier. They added more cattle and some horses, and eventually Tobias bought a few sheep that Emma loved to tend. Rebecca remained a constant presence in their lives, riding over to visit regularly and spoiling the children like a doting grandmother. She had aged over the years, but was still sharp and active, still running the double R with an iron fist. "You two are my success story," she told Victoria one afternoon when they were sitting on the porch watching the children play. "When Tobias brought you to me all those years ago, I saw a scared girl who had been beaten down by life. Look at you now. You are strong and confident, a wonderful mother and wife. You have built something amazing here." "I could not have done it without you," Victoria said. "You gave me a chance when you had no reason to, when I was just a stranger with nothing to recommend me. You believed in me before I believed in myself." "I saw your potential," Rebecca said, "and Tobias saw your heart. Between the 2 of us, we helped you see what you were capable of. But you did the work, Victoria. You earned everything you have." Victoria thought about that often. About how far she had come from the frightened young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach in Desdemona all those years ago. She had expected a rough life, and in many ways she had gotten one. The work was never ending, the land was harsh, and there were difficulties and hardships that had tested her in ways she could never have imagined. But she had also found something she had never expected. She had found a partner who treated her with kindness and respect, who valued her opinions and contributions, who loved her unconditionally. She had found a community that accepted her and supported her. She had found purpose and meaning in the work of building a home and raising a family. Most of all, she had found that she was stronger than she ever knew. Strong enough to cross a continent alone. Strong enough to build a life from nothing. Strong enough to face whatever challenges came her way. Years turned into decades. Robert grew up and married a girl from town, building his own house on a portion of the homestead. Emma married a young farmer and moved to a neighboring county, though she visited often with her own growing family. Thomas and Sarah were still at home, teenagers now, helping with the expanded ranch operations. Tobias's hair had gone gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Victoria's hands were permanently calloused, and her face was weathered from decades of prairie wind and sun. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love by a spring all those years ago. "You ever regret it?" Tobias asked her one evening. They were sitting on the porch watching the sun set, just as they had done countless times over the years. "Coming to Texas, marrying me, choosing this life." "Not for a single moment," Victoria said honestly. "This life has been harder than I ever imagined, but it has also been richer and fuller. I have you, and I have our children, and I have this land that we built together. What more could I possibly want?" "I just want to make sure you are happy," Tobias said, "that you do not feel like you settled for less than you deserved." Victoria reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining just as they had that first day by the spring. "I settled for nothing," she said firmly. "I chose you and you chose me, and together we built something amazing. I am happier than I ever dreamed possible," and it was true. When Victoria looked back on her life, on the long journey from Philadelphia to Texas, from desperation to security, from loneliness to love, she felt nothing but gratitude. She had expected so little and received so much. She had expected a rough life. What she got was a man whose kindness and tenderness had surprised her every single day, whose love had healed wounds she had not even known she carried, whose partnership had made her stronger than she ever could have been alone. She had expected hardship. What she got was purpose and meaning, the satisfaction of building something lasting with her own hands, the joy of watching her children grow and thrive. She had expected loneliness. What she got was family, both blood and chosen, people who loved her and supported her and made her life richer. The sun finished setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed peacefully. Closer, Victoria could hear Sarah laughing at something Thomas had said as they finished evening chores. "I love you," Tobias said quietly. "Just as much now as I did the day I married you. More, even." "I love you too," Victoria replied. "Thank you for saving me that day in Desdemona. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for giving me a chance at this life." "Thank you for trusting me," Tobias said. "For believing in us when you had every reason to be afraid. For building this life with me." They sat together in the gathering darkness, hands clasped, hearts full. Around them, the homestead they had built together stood strong and solid, a testament to years of hard work and determination and love. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, filled with the evidence of lives well lived. Victoria thought about the young woman she had been, standing alone and terrified outside that saloon in Desdemona. If she could go back and speak to that frightened girl, what would she say? She would tell her to have courage. She would tell her that the kindness of strangers can change everything. She would tell her that love, real love, is worth any hardship. She would tell her that she is stronger than she knows, capable of things she cannot yet imagine. Most of all, she would tell her that sometimes the life we expect and the life we get are two very different things. And sometimes, if we are very lucky, the life we get is so much better than anything we could have dreamed. Victoria had expected a rough life. What she found was love in all its forms. And that, she reflected as she sat beside her husband under the vast Texas sky, had made all the difference.